Welcome back to the show, 19 past 7 on a Friday morning. If you're just waking up, we saw the first hurdle pass last night as far as the Macquarie Point Stadium goes in State Parliament, with the lower house voting it through to the upper house to make a final decision. And one person that will be a big part of that is Bec Thomas, who's kindly joined us on the show this morning. Morning, Bec.
Good morning, guys.
The AFL, they've made it perfectly clear, Bec, that no stadium, no team. As we sit here today, are you still willing to vote against the stadium in a few weeks, which would ultimately kill the Tasmania Football Club?
Oh, look, Brent, it's a really tough call, isn't it? And it's a significant decision to make that's going to have implications for future generations to come, whichever way it goes. And look, I've said from the outset that with my heart, I support a stadium. I want to be able to support a stadium. I think we, as Tasmanians, deserve to have the infrastructure that other states have. We deserve to have an AFL team. There's no question about that. And you know, I've said time and time again that it's just such a shame that this issue of a stadium has divided the Tasmanian community and become such a divisive issue, because we should be united on having an AFL team, and in fact we are. So, look, it's a significant decision, and I'll certainly be continuing to ask questions of the government, and they need to start providing me with answers. Do
you acknowledge, though, that we are in this situation now where it is no stadium, no team? We've seen politicians fly to Melbourne, etc. Are you comfortable that you know that's what the situation is?
Well, look, that will be a matter for the government and for the AFL, ultimately. That's the position right now. Will that be the position post the vote? Who knows? Anything can happen, really. So I totally acknowledge that is the position right now, absolutely. But is that going to be the position going forward? That remains to be seen.
Bec, take us inside what it's like in the upper house at the moment. Obviously, the heat's on you. Dean Harris is the other one who seems like the path of least resistance, I guess, for the vote to get through. Is the government, I guess, trying to woo you? Or I get the feeling, based on your comments the other day, that you don't feel that way so much.
No, absolutely. Look, they're certainly not acting like a government who this is super important to, or who needs my support, if I'm to be frank about it. I've been asking questions and providing feedback, questions that have remained unanswered, and feedback that has fallen on deaf ears about some of my concerns about the order itself. We're not voting on do we have an AFL team or not. We are voting on a really significant infrastructure project that is going to cost Tasmanian taxpayers a really significant amount of money, that will require borrowings to pay for it, that are going to impact future generations and government services for years to come. So this is a really significant decision, and I really need answers on how the government intends to pay for it.
You would think the government would be, if they wanted your vote, as much as they say they do, you think the government would be doing everything short of peeling your grapes right now. But why do you think they haven't, got back to you in a more timely manner on the questions you've asked? Obviously, you highlighted the fact that you wanted money for grassroots basketball courts. That money wasn't in the interim budget, though they say it'll come next year. What are they up to?
I don't know. AJ, that's really a question for them. I can't work it out. I mean, as I say, if they really did need and want my support, they should be answering my questions. And these are my questions that I'm asking on behalf of Tasmanians who I represent. You know, I have a real responsibility to the people of Tasmania in making this decision, and a responsibility to ensure that the Parliament's not signing a blank cheque, and that's effectively what we're being asked to do here. The Parliament's not typically a planning authority, and nor should it be. So this is a really unusual circumstance. We're there to make law. What we're being asked to do is to consider an order to approve a significant infrastructure project, and an order that is not amendable. So there are no changes that can be made to it. It is what it is, and that was why it was really important for the government to consider the feedback I provided before it was finalised, but they haven't incorporated that into the order.
You've been an open book on this issue. You've come on this show. I understand you're going to be quizzed by another journalist with a beard later in the morning. But you've made it pretty clear that your vote somewhat hinges on the government also supporting grassroots sport. How do you make sure that it's sort of not a quid pro quo and it's not transactional, and you're not, I guess, selling your vote for something that will benefit your electorate? Now, obviously, grassroots sport's a worthy cause. But you know what I'm getting at. How do
Yes.
you make sure it's not that sort of I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine?
Yeah, well, look, what I was looking at in the budget papers that were put out last week was the spend or the proposed appropriation for community sport going forward over the forward estimates. And it's quite hard to make out in the budget papers, so I'll have a lot of questions for the Minister for Sport next week when we do budget estimates about what the breakdown of that funding looks like, because it is dropping by 72% from this financial year to 4 years' time. The spend for community and elite sport, and by elite sport I mean like Tasmanian Institute of Sport, not professional, commercial, but Tasmanian Institute of Sport. But the breakdown isn't clear in the budget papers, so it's hard to determine what that funding is actually for. But regardless, I know that is the bucket that includes funding for community sport, and it's dropping by 70% over the forward estimates. Now, that's not okay. There's lots of things dropping by lots of amounts over the forward estimates because the government wants to make it look like there's a surplus in 4 years' time. So they're not probably realistic figures that are included. But regardless, when I look at that and see the funding going down, how can I, in all good conscience, say that I'm going to support this when clearly essential services and things that are really important to grassroots community on the ground are going down? And so that's what I've been looking at. In terms of the other project, the specific project that I've been on this show talking about, advocating for the Home for Hobart basketball in Newtown Bay, that's been something I've been pushing for quite some time, and that's because there's an evidence-based need for that facility. Basketball Tasmania's facilities strategy shows there's a shortage of 16 courts across Greater Hobart. There's an evidence-based need for that. So there's never been a give me these courts and I'll vote for the stadium. That's not how it works. I've been advocating for that, and I'll continue to advocate for enough indoor courts until there is enough so that no kid misses out on the opportunity to play, because that's my concern, that Hobart will become a place where you can watch sport but you can't play it.
I just want to take you back to what you said earlier. So, as we said, the AFL is crystal clear. No stadium, no team. Do you think there's an alternate universe where the Devils stay alive? Because, to be honest, I can't see that happening.
Well, I don't know, Brent. I haven't had those conversations with the AFL. I haven't had, certainly the government doesn't suggest that that's the case, but that will be a conversation that would have to be had, right? If we go forward and there is no stadium, that will be, if I was the government, I'd be going to the AFL and saying, what are we going to do here? This is really important.
Haven't
to
the
us.
AFL made it clear, though, that there will be no team if there's no stadium?
They have, yes. But anything's possible.
Just a text here from David on the Harcourts Open Line. Love the work Bec is doing for grassroots sport. Is Bec comfortable without the stadium we lose over $300 million for grassroots infrastructure?
Well, I don't know that it's $300 million for grassroots.
Well, let's just turn it to the $360 million the AFL's offering then, I guess. Are you comfortable losing that amount of money into Tasmania?
Well, I guess what I would say is the significant amount of money that the government's proposing to invest in this stadium may mean that the government doesn't invest in other areas, including community sport. So, it could be lost in that way. So it sort of balances out, if that makes sense.
Bec, you come on this show and obviously, Brent wears his heart on his sleeve. He wants the stadium, but you must get the opposite when you're out and about. What is the vibe like in your neck of the woods? Yeah,
look, it's mixed, of course. The polling clearly shows that around 60% of Tasmanians don't want a stadium and around 40% do. And it depends where you go and which circles you're mixing in. You go to a sporting club and most people there will say they want you to vote for a stadium. If they don't want it, they're probably too scared in that environment to say it because they'll cop it from their fellow sports people. But if I go to Northgate talking to people, a lot of people are concerned about impacts on their grandkids, future generations having to pay for this. They can see the message has got through loud and clear that our budget is in a really dire situation. We're headed towards $13 billion worth of debt, and when the government is borrowing to pay for its operations, you're in trouble. And the concern that I have significantly about the budget was that it doesn't propose any new revenue measures, and the government's been quite clear that they will not introduce any new taxes. So when I keep asking the question, how are we going to pay for this, the only answer I get is borrowings. So then how are we going to pay for the interest on the borrowings? There's no answer to this. There's no proposed increased revenue to pay for it.
Listening to you this morning, Bec Thomas, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems to me that unless the government works hard in the next few weeks, you're going to vote against this.
Well, look, it's as I said at the outset, I really want to be able to support this with all of my heart. And I've been clear about that from day one, even before I was elected to Parliament. Through the campaign, I was saying I'm for a stadium, but I need to analyse all the information. We can't do this at any cost, and it would be irresponsible for Parliament to be signing a blank cheque. We've seen the issues that this government has faced in terms of significant infrastructure projects recently. We've seen the cost blowouts with the TT line and the berth. That was expected to cost $93 million. Now it's up to $493 million. We've seen the bus ticketing system has blown out from 7 million to 65 million or thereabouts. How can Tasmanians trust this government when it says that it's going to put 375 million plus borrowings into the stadium at a cost of 1.13 billion when we don't even have a final project cost yet? So I need more answers and honesty from the government, and that's what Tasmanians deserve.
So you think you'll learn something you don't know in the next 3 weeks that you don't know already that could sway you either way?
Well, look, I really hope so. I put a number of questions to the government last week on the notice paper about asset management plan for the facility. Getting a bit into the weeds, absolutely, I acknowledge that, but that's because this is a really significant decision with significant implications for generations to come. So, I make no apologies for doing my absolute best to scrutinise this. That's the role of the Legislative Council, is to hold the government to account, scrutinise what they're proposing to do in this, what is an unusual situation, because it is an order that is not amendable. So it's also very technical, and Parliament is not a planning authority. It's something like almost 200 pages, and some of the stuff is really technical in terms of from a planning sense. So when Parliament's being asked to be a planning authority, we're not planners, we're not planning experts, we've got to rely on advice. And the advice we have is the analysis of the Tasmanian Planning Commission, which, like it or not, found that proceeding with the project will diminish the economic welfare of Tasmanians versus the advice of the government. So they're the two bits of advice we've got. We've got the Tasmanian Planning Commission saying one thing, and then we've got the government and government departments refuting that. So then it's a decision for us. Who do we believe?
Hey, got to get to the news headlines. Can you stick around for a couple of minutes?
Sure.
Excellent. Bec Thomas is with us, really generous with her time here on SEN Tassie Breakfast, as she always is. We'll come back after this with some of your texts. There's lots here, AJ, to get through on the Harcourts Open Line. That's next on SEN Tassie Breakfast. Welcome back to the show, 7:34. Bec Thomas has been good enough to join us. She's got a big decision to make in a few weeks' time about Macquarie Point Stadium in the upper house. Oh, goodness me. There's lots of text coming through for you here, Bec. Listening to Bec Thomas is like listening to my wife. I know she's right, but I don't want to hear it. That's from Bert on the Harcourts Open Line. Catherine, because make sure you ask the Premier and Government whatever you need. I'm sure they will make clear on all concerns before the upper house vote. That's from Catherine. Thanks, Catherine, for your text this morning. AJ, you fire off a few questions to Bec while I'll go through these and filter some of them out.
Okay, thanks, Brent. Do you think your vote is the one? I mean, you're in the upper house. I mean, the heat's on you and you're doing radio this morning, but could it be, no offence, that your vote doesn't count and it gets up anyway?
Could be. Who knows? I'm just one vote. There are 8 independents in the upper house. Some have declared their position and some haven't. And I'm not the only one who hasn't made up my mind here. So yes, whilst I'm happy to be out and about talking about that and open about that, not everyone is, and that's fine. That's their prerogative. But I am absolutely just one vote, and this doesn't fall on me. Only it's all of us who are making this decision.
Do you talk to those other colleagues, Dean Harris, Casey Hiskett, who I think is probably going to vote for it based on his campaigning? Ruth Forrest has obviously been very critical of the government's, handling of the finances. Do you talk to those others, and are your concerns their concerns?
Oh, look, we've got a lot going on in that place. So, we tend to be focused on what's happening in the moment. We've had other important legislation that we've been considering this week. We've established a bill to establish a new children's commission. So Children and Young People's Commission, so that was the focus yesterday. But yeah, of course we talk to each other. It's a really great workplace actually, and we're really supportive of each other. So we're all really, I would say, most of us are concerned about the state's financial position, and that was really clear in our budget replies this week, that we are really concerned that the government isn't taking any significant steps or meaningful steps towards budget repair and budget reform. You know, the pre-election financial outlook by Treasury, the Treasury advice is clear that economic growth alone is not going to fix our budget problem. The government needs to adopt a range of different measures to fix the state's financial position, and it is not proposing any ways to bring in revenue.
Now, I don't want to get conspiratorial this early in the morning, but it seems to me that the government, should be able to do the things that you're asking, especially taking that money out of the budget, which was obviously something you wanted. Has it crossed your mind the government isn't trying that hard to get this to work because they want someone else to blame if it falls over? Is that crazy talk?
No, well, I've been asking that for some time. AJ, even back in May, when the enabling legislation was proposed and the Premier made those statements in the Parliament about every member will have a vote on whether we have an AFL team. And I remember talking to you about it back at that time, saying, well, we're not voting on an AFL team, we're voting on a significant infrastructure project, and that's our role as Parliament. And back then, some of the comments the Premier made, I couldn't help but think, does the government really want this, or are they hoping it goes down among a sea of shifting blame? That it sinks, they were the words that I used. And given that they have been non-responsive to some of the feedback I've provided about one of my core concerns is the amount of power vested in the Secretary of State Growth to sign off on conditions that are included in the order. Now, I know that sounds like it's getting a bit technical, but it's effectively asking Parliament to approve the government signing off on its own homework when it comes to a significant infrastructure project. And no council, no other developer would be able to do that, and this is to ensure there are proper safeguards and quality assurance around this project. That just doesn't stack up from a governance perspective. So that's one of the core concerns that I've been conveying to the government, that having the Secretary of State Growth having the power to approve, sign off on all the conditions just doesn't cut it from my perspective, and that's what's in the order that we've got at the moment.
So many texts have come in here on the Harcourts open line. Hamish has given me the wind-up, unfortunately. I'd love to go through them all with you. Good luck. It's a big 3 weeks coming up. There's no doubt about that. You got big decision to make, but as always, you've been so good with your time for us here at SEN Tassie. Really appreciate it. Good luck with everything moving forward.
Thanks, guys.
Bec Thomas joining us here on SEN Tassie.